The New York Times had an article last week about the 100th anniversary of the novel The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. First published in 1925, it was kind of just a moderate success, but it obviously grew in popularity over time to become a classic of American literature. The New York Times said that what makes The Great Gatsby so great is many terrific and memorable characters. Jay Gatsby's father in the novel says that Jay, his son, was so successful because he started early in life keeping lists of ways he could improve himself. Modern motivational speakers today really don't suggest we keep a list, but if it worked for The Great Gatsby, maybe we should all start making one. Welcome. Welcome to Illinois Bridging Awareness. I'm Stanley Smith. The Great Gatsby was really a story of reaching across divides, divides between rich and poor, male and female, and across the political spectrum, whatever it is that divides us. Carl Jung said that the concept of the anima and animus, that women project their idealized version of man onto man, and man projects his idealized version of woman onto woman, and we're often disillusioned, disappointed, but also it could be a self-fulfilling prophecy. We can see the idealized version of the other in ourselves reflected back, and in that is an opportunity to move our narrative forward, reaching across the divide. Recently, J.D. Vance reached across the divide to Pope Francis, and twice, twice in a day today, people have suggested to me that J.D. Vance perhaps played a role in the Pope's demise. I don't know if it's necessary that we see that narrative, but if it moves your narrative along in some kind of positive direction by seeing that, well, then it might serve a purpose. But otherwise, it's probably not the most productive conspiracy theory to advance, but it is out there circulating. Here in Chicago, I went by the Cathedral of the Holy Name, and it was decked out in all the funeral crepe, celebrating the funeral rites. When I went by, it was a mass of people streaming in for a service for the Pope. And when I came back later, it was the news trucks packing up with the Cook County Sheriff providing some security. The news broadcasters were conversing amongst themselves how best to present and frame the story and which part of the story they were going to lead with on the nightly news. Here in Chicago, in my travels, about maybe 9 months ago, I noticed this phenomenon of this sidewalk kind of renegade artist filling in potholes and cracks in the sidewalk. We grow up with the idea of step on a crack and you'll break your mother's back, but somebody saw an opportunity in that to fill in the gap, fill in the divide between our reality and our perception, and create something kind of beautiful in the process. I was also rather impressed because they did an expertly crafted job of filling this in, so it's perfectly smooth, um, and really transforming a trip hazard into something that's more of an experience. Elsewhere in the loop, I think this was on Dearborn Street, I found this other version by the same or similar artist, inspired to make something out of nothing and fill in a troublesome spot, an even spot in the sidewalk into something navigable and lovely. Also reminds me of I think it's the Chinese or Japanese art of kintsugi, where you fill in the broken pieces of porcelain with a gold filigree. On my meeting last week with Leslie Wright from the Grant Park Conservative Council about the parks, Grant Park in particular, she shared with me this story that there was a citizens group actually advocating for the removal of these beautiful equestrian statues with the uh, representation of a Native American on the mounted horseback as you enter Grant Park, trying to advocate for their removal because according to their research, Native American people also enslaved other people. They were slave owners. They enslaved, conquered Native people tribes, and conscribed them to some sort of labor or menial tasks. as a form of slavery. And so that was the basis for advocating for removing these statues. This was shortly after the removal of the Christopher Columbus statue from Grant Park. Leslie shared with me the happy story of her committee in the Grant Park Advisory Committee Council assessing every statue in the park and advocating for the statues to remain with some sort of contextual description to make that possible. On State Street here in Chicago this week, the flowers are in bloom, the tulips. This is actually block after block after block on both sides of State Street, blanketing a carpet of tulips, really phenomenal colorscape downtown. This is one of the tulips that I saved last week. Someone had pulled out a tulip bulb and I plucked it out of the middle of State Street before a car ran over it, and I was able to resurrect it right here on my dining room table, where it found new life, all during the Easter season. I was recently at a dinner party, and the topic of having conversations. I find it's easier now to have conversations along a larger, wider breadth of topics and subject matter without people completely freaking out. At the dinner party, there were some leftover vases of freesia flowers from Easter. And I use that as an example that even though I do feel there's movement and progress at both ends of the spectrum, young and old, I do see hope in the idea of young people who seem especially open to topics and conversations about perhaps challenging or abstract ideas. And I pointed to the vases of freesias as an example. Some of my older friends would point to the vase of freesias and freak out and say, I hate freesias. I hate those colors. I'm allergic, or I don't like the smell. Any number of triggers and reactions, often negative, that would really dominate the conversation. Whereas young people, in my assessment, would simply point to the vase of flowers and say, oh, it's a vase of flowers. So I think that's something we can all be mindful of in our conversations and our own reactions. I mean, are we seeing it for what it is, or are we just going through the same reaction process, living through all the triggers that we've spent a lifetime cultivating? A friend of mine in the office building here, a lawyer across the hall, friend died, and he's shopping for some funeral flowers. It was so interesting. He invited me to navigate the site for him to make a selection. And this came up in an article about choosing the right color of flower for the funeral, and it advocated for checking with the family or the funeral home to find out if there's a theme or appropriate color guide for selecting your funeral flowers. His friend was a fisherman. They fished together in their early life together as high school friends. And this came up, the gone fishing funeral flower arrangement. It was also adjacent to the gone golfing, any number of thematic flowers that wasn't aware existed. Recently, I became cross paths with the Jordan Peterson, motivational speaker. My cousins are visiting from Europe, and they put me on to him. And they said that even though he's a conservative person, they found a lot of value in what he had to say. I believe he's from Canada and a psychology background. And he talked about facing our worst case scenarios, that there's value in that because we can rise above it and write a productive narrative for ourselves. He gave the example of Christ as someone who embodied encountering and facing the ultimate worst case scenario and rising above it. None of us want to end up like the Great Gatsby, floating face dead in a swimming pool, but we all do have challenges and opportunities in this lifetime, many of which are many very troubling and disturbing, but we always have the opportunity to rise above it. We're doing better than the Pope. The Pope was probably the closest person to God in the world, and he's dead, but we're all still alive and well right here in Illinois. If you would like to join us at Illinois Bridging Awareness, the Saturday call is every Saturday at 9 a.m. Central Time on Zoom. I will include my email in the description of this video. I'll be happy to send you an invitation. And I look forward to seeing you very, very soon.